Briefings, and it's now we'll speak about decentralization. It's promises of a political parties, or is it like real steps and real activities? The next press briefing will be with the support of International Renaissance Foundation in the framework of Ukrainian Media Center of Reforms. We'll speak about that. Anatoly Tkachuk, the Civil Society Institute Director, Yury Ganushchak, Municipal Development Institute, Ihor Koliushko, the head of the Center for Political and Legal Reforms. You are invited.
Legal reforms. What's just legal reforms?
Good afternoon. No, good morning. We were not planning to hold a public event, but life forced us to do that because it's very important in the media sector during campaigns, to say that we will run decentralization. I speak about political parties. We analyzed programs of manifestos of political parties, and we understood that the situation becomes confusing more and more. The top political parties, they have a chance to come to the parliament. They don't understand decentralization and local self-governance, or they're afraid to show how they understand local self-governance. That's why there is an initiative, so-called strategic advisory councils, so groups that work with the government. And there's a group of experts that they work on the issue of decentralization. And in that group of experts, for several months, we prepare a number of draft laws which are necessary for Ukraine and for decentralization, which is clear, logical, and necessary, not for the sake of a process, but for the sake of results. So, not to go into details. So the theory, I suggest that you look at this slide, on this picture. On one page, we tried to put to show the minimal number of draft laws that are necessary to decentralize Ukraine. So we have it on our on CD, and we printed out this slide, this chart for journalists and political activists to have a look what we need for decentralization, and for them to be able to ask political parties and leaders what they have to ready among these tools and how they are going to run the reforms. One more comment, which is very important. Look at, we have such a thing like a concept of reform in local self-governance and territorial organizing of power in Ukraine. That is a document which was already approved by the government, and so it's in force. It provides ideology of decentralization. The government consists of Батьківщина, Удар, Свобоda, sorry, I will not speak about Udar, not Udar. But look at programs of those political parties. Do they meet this approved concept? No. They're in harmony. Is it the only reform which has a political document? But there are draft laws, for example, amendments to the Constitution that don't meet requirements, so are not in harmony with this document. And so myself and my colleagues, according to this concept, we developed a number of fundamental documents, amendments to the Constitution of Ukraine that are in harmony with the concept. Some projects of the first line, project on cooperation of territorial communities and about uniting of communities, changes to budget code, to tax code, and a number of draft laws that come out of this, the law on local self-governance and the law on local administrations, administrative system, and a whole number of bylaws that come out of these draft laws. So we want, and our plans are quite ambitious, to prepare the whole package of legislation for when we have the parliament and when there is a coalition and when they have developed the cabinet of ministers, for them to have a subject for negotiations, for discussions, and for them to approve this and to start work on decentralization. If there is an interest, we can show you many other things on those CDs in addition to draft documents, and we have some visuals. So we do two jobs: project designs, and we provide information. And we're trying, in a visualized way, an infographic, to show to potential clients of reforms, I mean people, how everything must happen, and how to start cooperation between territorial communities to solve local problems. So this is a general. My colleagues
who are here next to me, they are responsible for very important parts of the reform, especially those which are on local administrations. If you look into the party programs, you see that executive power in Ukraine is to be liquidated, because it says to liquidate the local administrations. The executive power will be exercised via the executive committee, but the executive power is the state-owned. The self-governing body cannot be the state body, because now our state body is also the self-governing body, and this is the problem. So Mr. Koliushko is a leading expert and specialist in that, and he will talk about that in more detail. And Mr. Ganushchak will talk more about territorial system and financial resources, and will be able to answer all your questions later. Thank you. Basically, local state administrations in the reform, the situation is quite interesting with that. What was the background of that? On the 1st of April this year, the Cabinet of Ministers approved the concept of reform of local self-government and the concept of decentralization. This concept provided for local administrations which will stay, but their functions which will be changed. They become the bodies of executive power, which will be conducting oversight over the territories. They will be ensuring the constitutional function, which according to the constitution is the function of the Cabinet of Ministers. They will be ensuring that the laws all over the territory of Ukraine are observed. And that is very specific. It's not just legality. But wherever we go to talk about decentralization, the first question people ask, especially in central, eastern, and southern Ukraine, is, but could that bring to feudalization? Maybe in the result of decentralization, we, common citizens, we may become slaves of new feudals, like there was Lazinsky in Kirovograd region. And that is what these people are concerned with. And on the other hand, that is the real threat. The state has to guarantee that this does not happen, and the instrument of that should be the local administrations, which are to be related functionally with the Cabinet of Ministers. And the Cabinet of Ministers has to participate in appointing their heads. Then the Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, a few weeks after approval by the Cabinet of Ministers of this concept, back in April, made a statement that we will liquidate the local state administrations without explaining what he meant. We were trying to find out what he meant, and then there was some explanation in the draft law which was submitted by Poroshenko, and that was the law on introducing amendments to the Constitution of Ukraine. And they took the materials from the developed by the working group at the Ministry of Municipal Development, but and they included that. But when they took the part about executive authorities, they wrote about liquidation of executive power, but then introducing the representatives of the president. This was described in the section, the President of Ukraine. And if that project were approved, we would have had two executive authorities. And it would be just like in 2008 and 2009 when we had this problem between Yushchenko and Tymoshenko. And that draft was pushing us towards same situation. Neither the president nor the cabinet of ministers till now have had a dialogue, a discussion with experts on that. What they think about that, we do not know, but we are working on the concept and the draft law which is developed on the local administration. State administration provides for preserving state administrations, and you can see that on the scheme there are self-governing bodies. They should implement all the local policy. They make decisions about what should be done and how it should be done, and that should be their scope of responsibilities. And local state administrations, which are sort of parallel structure of public administration, they should have the right exclusively to go to the court if the local self-governing body violates laws. They should become the detergent factor, which will not be, which will be preventing any violations of the law. Plus, they could organizationally support the functioning of all state inspectorates, which from the district level will be operating on the territories. They may coordinate other executive bodies which are present on behalf of the cabinet of ministers. So these are all these key issues, and it is very important today that we, all the citizens, and much depends on mass media, we should understand this key issue of decentralization. That does not mean that the state gives it all away and forgets about it. No, the state leaves for itself the function of legislative regulation, because self-governance is independent governance within the law. And secondly, the state has to have the right and the instruments to ensure execution of and observation of the laws. That's all I wanted to share.
Before we came, they told that we give powers, and to whom? And those who get these powers, can they use them? That's extremely important, because when we speak about given powers in the field of education, if in a village 300 people live, that means that there are 30 kids that go to a school. That's not a school. So it's very important to identify a territory in the framework of which there could be a full-fledged number of services of local self-governance. And very often we hear that we give resources. Resources to whom? If there are no children, no powers in the field of education, if there is no such powers. Even if there is a vodka factory, there could not be budget money because public money are spent only for powers. So a balance of powers and resources and territory, that's a territorial base, is very important. That's why we suggested to pass the law on an administrative system that solves that dilemma and amendments to the budget and tax code. Here, the floor is yours, Yury. Thank you. Unfortunately, there is no party that is running to the parliament that wants to speak about the reform administrative system. That's a syndrome of 2004, but there is one more reason for that, which is more pragmatic. These district state administrations, they are too weak to solve issues of the state, but they are sufficiently strong to organize administrative resources during campaigns. Realistically, that's the base for them not to speak about reform of administrative system, and that's because they can use it, that administrative resource, because in all the countries where they held a reform of administrative territorial system, they say that is the most thankful, the best reform for residents, for billions. Nobody loves public servants. That's why in different to structural reforms, from reforms in different sectors, and there is an issue of, for example, about closing or a hospital that causes some painful reaction from people, but a reform in administrative territorial system, or as Lukashenko told, shaking the apparatus, and that is taken positively. But somehow nobody wants to talk about that. At the same time, all conversations that services will be worse, it's don't stand any criticism, because the reform of administrative territorial system provides more shifting services, 90% of services closer to people. Moving them closer to people, those services. Look at communities which become a center of administrative territorial system. There will be 1,500 of them, approximately, and they are built around economic centers of economic activity, and in difference to these 488 districts. Take the proportion, the distance now, ever since the district center where they provide such services is 21 kilometer, a distance to newly created communities, to centers of centers. There is 11 kilometers, so 2 times less. So all powers, they're social powers, so like first aid, medical aid, there is high school education, preschool education, kindergarten, services for social welfare that will be provided on community levels, and that twice closer to consumers of these services than now. And subunits of executive branch bodies that will be placed, located in communities, like police, security, civil protection, pension fund office, social welfare, registration of property rights, and but they must be in every community. So we bring services closer to people. That's what is provided by this reform. At the same time, sub-regional level, which is not able to do anything now. It is moved to the level of administrative districts, and the working name is rayons or districts. But we think about how to a notion of rayon. For us, not to have an insinuations. We want to change it to okrug or to poviet. These are draft names, and there will be 150, 100, 150 of them. And that will be the base for bodies of executive branch of general jurisdiction, like district state administration and executive branch powers, territorial bodies that represent central ministries. And on that level, we create those bodies. All the rest are those subunits. So the issue of like Vradivka, they will not have such a problem because there will be no police department which will decide on arrest and keeping people arrested and in jail and pre-trial and other activities. Those decisions will be taken on the level of a body, and on the level of Vradivka will be a subunit of police, and their task will be just to stop crimes, offenses, and to detain people until a decision. So the level of abuses will fall dramatically. As to budget and tax reform, the budget and tax reform we participated in. The government, fortunately, was able the only body in the cabinet of ministers which demonstrates the spirit of reform, so that is the Minister of Finances, which is usually a conservative, and also the Ministry of Regions, which supports all the initiatives. Oh, guides, it's guiding of them. That's very good. So there were changes, amendments to tax and budget codes, and which imply decentralization, autonomy to local self-governance bodies that it provides, and they will not depend on transfer of money for planning and for everyday execution of the budget. In addition to that, we even expenditures which does not encourage to earn more, and which is practiced in EU countries. There will be enough of motivation because of the difference per capita after evening between the best territorial unit and the weakest. There will be 2 times difference. That is quite a lot. But now, when there is a big pressure from regions, and the sentence that we feed all Ukraine, that's echoed seriously in minds of many people. So that's why I suggested this approach. So the difference between Dnipropetrovsk region and Kyiv will be separate, and Chernivtsi region for per capita will be two times difference. But that will be a motivation for regions with low salary, because the income tax they will work on taking out the salary from shadow. And the same will happen on district levels and for regional capitals. And then that formula will not go below. Below there will be the personal income, like payment for land, property tax, which will be there will be a remake for it, and then there will be taxation of all square meters of all premises, and that will be regulated. Tariffs will be regulated by local self-governance bodies, and the infrastructure in village councils and in towns is absolutely different, and it's not complete. That's why we cannot hand down powers for education to that level. Those powers will be brought to the level of districts. regulation will be on the level districts, and there's an opinion that will encourage to create, to unite, and to build bigger communities and voluntarily. We hope that the new government right away will bring these drafts to draft amendments to tax and budget code for the system to start working on January 1st. If that doesn't happen, we will lose not just a year, but more than 5, because local elections will be run according to the old election law. Also, we can lose the prospects for Ukraine as such, because decentralization forces and trends are just becoming stronger. Only changes to the budget and the tax code can stop those up from sent ununifying forces. Those parties that declare independence, they should understand that the real independence right here.
Thank you. And here on the slide you see the recent reforms. Many countries once every 20 years implement reforms because the life goes on. The administrative reform, the reform in the system of local self-governance. There's more and more decentralization. The latest ones, Ireland, Albania. Last autumn they started the process. In September this year they passed all the legislation. In Finland, in the spring of 2015, just like Albania, they will have elections on a new foundation. We have where to learn. And now, if you have questions, you're welcome. There's a question. I would like you to specify what taxes are planned to go to the local budgets and which will go to the center. Talking about taxes. The taxes which according to their nature are state taxes, VAT, excise tax, they state and they go to the budget. Talking about profit tax, 10% goes to district budget, regional budget, 90 stay within the state budget. 10% is a lot because the profit tax itself is very unstable, talking about territory. But the compromise should be achieved. So they put 10% so that the regions can feel it. The income tax, personal income tax, which previously was going to the local budgets, 25 is the village and the settlement council, 50 the district budget, and then 25 the regional budget. This system provoked the Minister of Finance to give higher forecast for this indicator, and now the decision is made. 60% will go to the city of district significance and of regional significance and the settlement and the community, and 15% will go to regional budget. The rest 25% will go to the state budget, and the temptation to give higher forecasts will not exist in the future. But also there is now the formula of leveling down the budget. If the index of tax capability, and that is the correlation between these incomes per capita compared to the average statistical. If it's more than 10%, less than 10% adds. You're giving such a details that people will get confused. Everything is very simple. The main part is the personal income tax. 60% goes to the community. The real estate tax, which will be changed significantly, and the land tax, 10% of profit tax will go to local level, and this 10% that the state will have is one of the important instruments of leveling the budget, balancing the budget. I have two questions and comment. This reform of decentralization provides for change of mentality. It brings up responsible people, and it was difficult with that in Ukraine. People do not understand. They get used that their problems are resolved by someone and they're happy with everything. On the other hand, the responsibility for their life and for community changes relations between the community and the state. And the state is not interested in that as the institution which we inherited after the Soviet power. And there is a concern that the problem itself will be just not resolved. All the parties who run the elections, they are talking about necessity, but the powers without opportunity or without capacity are just empty words. But what financial opportunities will be given to the regions? No program talks about that. Maybe these promises will be just empty promises. And when the new authorities are being formed, what can you give them as the counter argument so that they start listening to you? And then, do you believe that such reform, without the reform of territorial system, will not be efficient? This is a very good question. That is what we are also thinking about all the time. And it's not just for 1 month, but for a year. But the situation is very simple here. We as Ukraine have two alternatives. Either we do decentralization and gradually, differently in different regions and in different communities, we learn how to live a new way where there will be failures. They will look at those who are successful. You know, in Ukraine, people look at the village neighboring and say, okay, we'll do something, we'll do that better. And this way we will cope with all these problems. We have to refuse from paternalism. We need to gradually learn how to be responsible for our life and our actions. But if we do not start this reform, we will have what we had. Every 10 years we'll have Maidan. Or everything is accelerated in the world because there's no other way to express your will in the centralized people when all power, all resources are concentrated in the state bodies at the highest level. And these bodies are gradually privatized, then sooner or later the system boils and it's called revolution. And that is what we had in Maidan in winter this year. Not to allow this to happen, we need to learn how gradually to resolve our problems, and this could be done only within the framework of decentralization. I would like to again draw your attention to that scheme, because always when new government comes, it says we need to prepare reforms, because no one being in opposition is preparing the reforms. And that is why we today are doing this work instead of the opposition. We want to prepare the whole set of reforms which could be just implemented. Now, will people perceive the reform? Yesterday, I looked at very interesting sociological results. 80% of the respondents participated in self-organizations, in self-organizing themselves and volunteer activity. Ukraine changed its mentality. People are getting self-organized and they know how to resolve their problems. And we need to make use of this chance. And for the government to be able to do that, we have the projects. One more observation. After the reform, the first budget reform was implemented, there were big fears that they will not be able to manage transfers, but very quickly they learned how to do that. Less than in half a year, they learned how to do that. And what can be an incentive? If there's no decentralization, Ukraine will disintegrate according to Moscow's scenario. And there are quite concerning signals coming from the regions. One more thing. We would like to hear the names of those people who will be responsible for decentralization in the future government, because every party has the ambition to head the government or to have their representatives in the government. We want to see these people so that even before the elections we can assess whether they can implement reforms and even to help them. If we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank our experts for discussing this very important topic. And the next press briefing